Trump's bluff turned into Canada's blueprint for economic independence. Donald Trump once thought he could bully Canada into compliance, treating trade policy like a game of poker. He slapped tariffs on Canadian goods, threatened auto exports, and sneered at NAFTA as if Canada were some unruly tenant in America's economic backyard. But what he didn't realize, what he never seemed to realize, is that real leadership doesn't fold to bullies.
If you're done watching corrupt elites rig the system and leave you behind, subscribe now. If you want real talk, raw truth, and zero spin, this is your channel. If you're ready to fight back, hit that subscribe button and stand with us.
It rewrites the rules of the game. And under Mark Carney, Canada didn't just push back. It started building something stronger, smarter, and lasting. Carney took Trump's tariffs not as a defeat, but as a diagnosis. They revealed how overly reliant Canada had become on a volatile partner. So Carney flipped the script, reframing this trade war as a catalyst for independence, innovation, and diversification. Under his watch, Canada doubled down on its trade relationships with Europe through CETA, expanded ties with the Indo-Pacific region, and entered exploratory talks with African trade blocs. These weren't just diplomatic gestures. They were economic reconfigurations. Digital sovereignty versus corporate cronyism. Carney's boldest stroke? The digital services tax. It was a lightning rod in global finance, targeting the likes of Amazon, Meta, and Google with a simple premise. If you profit from Canadian consumers, you pay your fair share to Canada. Predictably, Trump threw a tantrum. He called it digital theft and accused Canada of targeting American innovation. But the truth? The digital tax wasn't anti-American. It was pro-accountability. Carney explained it clearly. The digital economy must be fair, not free for all. These corporations were extracting billions in revenue while paying pennies in tax. That's not capitalism. It's corporate colonialism. Trump, ever the defender of mega-corporate interests, couldn't stomach it. But Carney held the line, supported by growing international momentum. France, Germany, and even India praised Canada's tax model as a future standard. Carney's quiet diplomacy again outshined Trump's Twitter meltdowns. Fertilizer fallout. Trump's war on farmers. Nowhere was Trump's backfiring more tragic than in agriculture. His tariffs on Canadian fertilizer, potash, nitrogen compounds, phosphate, were sold to Americans as a strike against foreign cheaters. But on the ground, American farmers weren't clapping. They were panicking. Costs for fertilizer spiked by 30%. Small farms went into debt just to prepare for planting season. And by harvest time, yields dropped while prices rose, an artificial squeeze caused not by nature, but by politics. Trump boasted about protecting American industry, while American farmers, his base, were crushed under his decisions. Meanwhile, Carney met with provincial agricultural unions and partnered with cooperatives to stabilize the Canadian sector. Fertilizer exports were redirected to South America and Asia. Canada didn't just survive the tariff. It turned it into leverage. Carney's economic advisors even began talks on launching a global fertilizer exchange, positioning Canada as a stable supplier for emerging markets, filling the void Trump had created. The tourism recession no one predicted. By mid-2025, American border towns started to panic. It wasn't a war. It wasn't a boycott, but it was a quiet collapse. Canadians weren't showing up. From Niagara Falls, New York, to upstate Vermont, to the casinos of Michigan and the ski resorts of Montana. Hotels were vacant, restaurants shuttered, and service workers laid off. Why? Because Canadians were spending their dollars at home, or in Europe or the Caribbean, but not in the U.S. Carney had encouraged it, not with nationalism, but with pride. Support Canadian businesses. Travel at home. Spend where your values are respected. It resonated. Canadians didn't need to hold signs or stage protests. Their wallets spoke for them. The economic loss was real. Billions in revenue vanished from border economies. Yet Trump refused to budge. He mocked the tourism panic and blamed weak state leadership instead of admitting the truth. He started a trade war with an ally and never thought about the collateral damage. Investor confidence. One nation rises, one nation reels. Wall Street isn't loyal. It follows stability, predictability, and long-term value. And that's why by the fall of 2025, a quiet capital shift began. Canadian tech startups started receiving more U.S. venture funds. Pension plans once anchored in U.S. bonds began diversifying into Canadian infrastructure. Real estate investment trusts from Germany and Japan began eyeing Canada's housing-linked green energy zones. This wasn't by accident. Carney's government had issued green investment charters for cities transitioning to renewable energy and digital inclusion. These weren't just climate policies. They were bond markets with ethics. The world noticed. Meanwhile, Trump's America flirted with default showdowns, threatened the Federal Reserve, and promoted economic denialism over strategy. The U.S. dollar remained strong, but the faith behind it, that was eroding. Carney's new North, Arctic strategy with teeth. While Trump obsessed over imaginary border walls and got tangled in MAGA versus Biden drama, Carney was looking north, way north. Under his leadership, Canada launched a modern Arctic strategy. Not slogans, actual ships, satellites, and supply chains. His administration funded the construction of high-speed internet across Inuit communities, launched drone patrol systems for maritime sovereignty, and partnered with Scandinavian countries on Arctic trade lanes that bypass traditional U.S. hubs entirely. The goal? Make Canada not just a player in Arctic geopolitics, but a leader. While Trump's U.S. argued over oil permits, Carney invested in polar research stations and autonomous navigation tech. The North wasn't just a border. It became an economic frontier. Canada claimed it while America blinked. Populism versus public policy. Two countries, two realities. Trump's America was drowning in slogans. America first. Bring jobs back. Tariffs win wars. But they weren't working. Manufacturing jobs were down. Rural bankruptcies were up. Inflation remained stubborn. And political division made governance impossible. Carney's Canada? Quieter, yes, but healthier. His policy teams were expanding community broadband, revamping apprenticeships, and streamlining licensing for immigrants to work in healthcare and trades. Canada didn't need a culture war. It needed nurses. And Carney delivered. Where Trump picked fights with teachers' unions, Carney launched Tomorrow Labs, a.k.a. 12 tech literacy initiative tied to real-world skills. Where Trump blamed crime on immigrants, Carney launched data-driven urban safety partnerships. He treated governance like a system, not a stage show. The fall of NAFTA and the rise of the Carney Doctrine. When Trump finally walked away from NAFTA, it was supposed to be the end of trilateral trade as we knew it. But Carney had a counterplan. He didn't mourn NAFTA. He modernized its replacement. Canada signed subnational trade MOUs with U.S. states like California, Illinois, and Washington, bypassing D.C.'s gridlock. He built deeper supply chain ties with Mexico through joint green manufacturing corridors. And he led a block of mid-sized economies like South Korea, Norway, and Chile in creating a fair trade innovation compact, which emphasized labor rights, digital accountability, and cross-border resilience. Trump's America First had become America Alone. Carney's Canada was now at the center of a new economic network defined by trust, not intimidation, the epilogue of a trade war. By year's end, Trump's approval ratings dipped even among loyal voters. American consumers were angry. Canadian retaliatory tariffs on luxury goods, electronics, and processed foods had finally hit home. Meanwhile, Carney's approval stood above 60%. Canadians saw results: stable inflation, growing export markets, and a leader who spoke like an economist but governed like a builder. International newspapers began to draw comparisons. The Canadian Century asked The Economist, while Washington tweets, Ottawa trades, blared Le Monde. Carney wasn't just admired. He was being studied. Trump's trade war becomes a global joke. By mid-2026, Trump's economic bravado, once lauded by MAGA loyalists as hardball genius, had devolved into a global punchline. International markets no longer feared Trump's tariffs. They mocked them. What once sent shudders through Europe or Canada now triggered eye rolls. Investors, diplomats, and even late-night comedians recognized the pattern. Trump blusters, disrupts, retreats, and blames someone else. Take the infamous auto ultimatum of early 2026. Trump slapped punitive tariffs on Canadian electric vehicles, accusing Canada of undercutting American freedom. The result? Not a resurgence of Detroit manufacturing, but a flood of Chinese EVs entering the U.S. market through Mexico, bypassing the very policies he championed. Carney, meanwhile, doubled down on clean energy vehicles, opening 5 new battery facilities in Ontario and Quebec, many with EU funding. These plants weren't just jobs. They were symbols. As Trump waved flags, Carney built futures. As American consumers faced fewer choices and higher prices, Canadians saw electric cars rolling off assembly lines under a banner of economic and environmental progress. Trump's isolationism triggers a brain drain. One of the most damning consequences of Trump's policy chaos? The brain drain. While Trump targeted international students and slashed research funding, Carney made a bet. Brains are power. Canada fast-tracked visas for skilled workers from politically unstable regions, including the U.S. Tens of thousands of American researchers, engineers, and digital entrepreneurs quietly crossed the border, lured by stable funding, collaborative ecosystems, and a government that didn't treat science like a partisan wedge. The result? Canadian universities saw a 23% increase in postgraduate tech enrollment. AI startups mushroomed in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. Canada's biotech sector, once modest, began outpacing the U.S. in trials per capita. Carney had turned Trump's cultural war on intellect into Canada's innovation boom. NAFTA is dead. Long live the North Star Pact. With NAFTA dissolved and USMCA paralyzed by legal infighting, Carney pivoted. He launched the North Star Pact, a strategic trilateral alliance between Canada, Mexico, and select U.S. states willing to bypass federal obstructionism. California, New York, and Illinois quickly signed on. What made the pact revolutionary wasn't just its economics, it was its ethics. The North Star Pact required participants to uphold labor protections, environmental benchmarks, and transparent supply chains. It wasn't just trade, it was trust. Trump called it globalist sabotage, but the numbers told another story. Trade between pact members surged 14% in its first year. Canadian exporters found stability. Mexican workers received higher wages. Even American businesses in pact-aligned states flourished. It was proof. When you prioritize people and principles over populism, prosperity follows. The small towns left behind by Trump. While Trump railed about globalization and Canada stealing our steel, towns across Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Missouri quietly emptied out. Carney didn't gloat. He offered solutions. He launched cross-border apprenticeship programs, letting American workers train in Canadian industries that hadn't collapsed under chaotic policy. Some of these towns became part of what economists dubbed the Rust Belt rebound. But ironically, the rebound came with a maple leaf. Former Trump voters, disillusioned by inflation, broken factories, and empty promises, began sharing TikToks of their new jobs in Hamilton or Sudbury. They weren't betraying America. They were escaping incompetence. Trump's tech blacklist versus Carney's tech ecosystem. While Trump ramped up blacklists, banning Chinese apps, throttling TikTok, and threatening to nationalize data centers, Carney was orchestrating a more pragmatic dance. He invited global tech companies to build responsibly in Canada under new ethical AI and privacy frameworks. His pitch? Come innovate, but do it cleanly, transparently, and inclusively. It worked. A coalition of European, Japanese, and Canadian tech firms launched the Ethical Internet Accord in Vancouver. Meanwhile, U.S. firms bogged down by Trump's tech censorship were losing talent and market share. Trump insisted he was protecting freedom, but Carney had actually made it functional. Trump's energy nationalism backfires. In his third year of renewed power, Trump reignited fossil fuel expansion, gutting climate regulations, bulldozing renewable subsidies, and giving big oil a blank check. Energy freedom, he called it. But when hurricanes devastated the Gulf and heat waves crippled Texas's power grid, Americans saw the cost. Energy prices soared, infrastructure buckled, and investor confidence waned. Carney? He stayed the course. Canada's net zero roadmap was ahead of schedule. Green tech was booming. And provinces like Alberta, once oil-heavy, were rebranding as hydrogen and geothermal hubs. Global investors took notice. Canada's energy bonds became among the safest green assets worldwide. Trump promised oil independence. Carney delivered sustainable prosperity. The cultural divide widens. Trump's rhetoric was culture war on steroids. He railed against woke economics, called multiculturalism a threat, and mocked Canada as a snowflake factory. His base cheered, but the world watched and recoiled. Carney, quietly but consistently, defended pluralism. Under his leadership, Canada launched multilingual government platforms, increased refugee resettlement, and made anti-racism education a federal requirement. While Trump ran from diversity, Carney built with it. Internationally, Canada's image soared. The UN praised its Human Rights Index. Multinational firms cited social cohesion as a reason for expanding operations north of the border. Trump made exclusion a rallying cry. Carney made inclusion an economic asset. The dollar dilemma. By 2027, a new specter loomed: de-dollarization. Countries increasingly explored trading in yuan, euros, and digital tokens. It wasn't ideology, it was insurance. Insurance from Trump. While the U.S. weaponized the dollar in erratic sanctions and tariff games, Canada joined a pilot with the EU to explore a North Atlantic digital trade token. It wasn't a full currency replacement, but it was a clear signal. The world wanted options. Carney didn't rush or sensationalize. He positioned Canada as a stable bridge currency hub, a place where risk-averse investors could transact securely outside U.S. volatility. Trump didn't understand it, but economists did. This was a slow fade of dollar dominance, and Carney had carved Canada a piece of the future. Canada's ascent, Trump's eclipse. By the end of Trump's term, America was fractured, weary, and poorer. Inflation had cooled, but wages lagged. Trade deficits persisted. Allies were skeptical, and the global power dynamic had undeniably shifted. Carney wasn't the cause. He was a counterbalance. His leadership had been steady, principled, and fiercely strategic. Canada hadn't just weathered Trump's chaos. It had evolved because of it, and the world noticed. The final scene of this saga wasn't a press conference or a meme. It was a Canadian freighter pulling into a Nigerian port with green tech components bound for South America, financed by a multilateral trade bank Carney helped found. Quiet, deliberate, world-changing. Trump's America shouted. Carney's Canada built. And in the echoes of history, only one left behind a legacy worth following. Canada's digital sovereignty versus Trump's tech turbulence. In the age of data wars, Donald Trump chose confrontation. He slapped tariffs on semiconductors, banned Chinese apps, and threatened legal action against big tech giants, yet offered no coherent strategy. And his administration lashed out, called it protection of national security. But buildups were reactionary, inconsistent, and politically driven. Meanwhile, Mark Carney was charting a long-term digital path for Canada, one built not on fear, but foresight and inclusivity. Carney had launched Canada's National Digital Sovereignty Initiative in early 2025, quietly, before Trump's tech tantrums began. It centered on three pillars: secure infrastructure, ethical data governance, and international technological partnerships. When Trump banned TikTok and throttled cloud partnerships, Canada responded by fast-tracking domestic cloud certification programs and online privacy frameworks, both consumer-friendly and exportable. Rather than bans, Carney's people went public. We believe in secure, ethical digital innovation, not scare campaigns. And global tech firms noticed. Ireland, Singapore, and even some U.S. startups began forging secondary data centers in Canada, citing policy stability. Meanwhile, U.S.-based firms frustrated by Washington's digital crackdown began leveraging Canada as their gateway to international expansion. Trump's retaliations backfired spectacularly. His semiconductor tariff, meant to protect U.S. chip makers, ended up disrupting American hardware pipelines. Tech manufacturers relying on Canadian AI chips were forced to find costly workarounds. Firms queuing for domestic U.S. production facilities couldn't get licenses, while Canada's own wafer fab received EU and Japanese investments. Carney's Canada capitalized on the chaos, marketing its secure chip supply chain as stable, scalable, and trustworthy. Cross-border AI ethics versus American tech isolation. When Trump revoked America's participation in the global AI regulator, Carney stepped in. He launched the Toronto Declaration Circle in mid-2025, an alliance of governments, academics, and corporations dedicated to ethical AI regulation based on transparency, human rights, and public trust. Within months, Norway, Germany, South Korea, and 18 other nations had signed on. Trump, in contrast, swung through Silicon Valley delivering threats and calling for American jobs first. But when he suggested Congress should pressure social media platforms, the backlash from bipartisan digital rights groups was immediate. Silicon Valley insiders cited fear of government overreach, not surveillance or censorship, as their primary concern. Carney's approach, built on dialogue and principle, was contagious. International bodies began endorsing Canada's digital standards as a template. At Davos, Carney sat alongside German and Japanese ministers to present a unified framework. The world took notice. Canada's digital leadership was growing, while America's reputation deteriorated under Trump's erratic digital policies. Finite digital tax versus Trump's corporate playbook. Earlier, we discussed Canada's 3% digital services tax. Trump's response was predictable: threats of reciprocal tariffs and claims of corporate sabotage. But Carney saw it differently. This wasn't a punitive measure. It was a fairness mechanism designed to hold multinationals accountable. As Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, and Google publicly lobbied Washington to protect them, Canada doubled down on transparency. Carney commissioned an independent report, open to public scrutiny, showing that these firms annually diverted an estimated $50 billion to low-tax jurisdictions while owning Canadian user data. It wasn't just a tax, Carney argued. It was an ethical boundary. Trump barked, but Carney drew a line. And once again, Canada's posture seemed advanced, whereas America's reaction appeared kleptocratic, clinging to corporate cronyism over public interest. Conclusion: two futures, one lesson. Trump believed power came from bluster, that fear could drive trade, that dominance would deliver results. Carney believed power came from partnership, that dignity fuels diplomacy, that good policy is slow, boring, but powerful. One turned Canada into a target, the other turned it into a model, and the verdict, seen in markets, in factories, in grocery bills, and in public trust, was undeniable. When you lead with foresight, fairness, and facts, you win.